As we've been reporting, 100 migrant children were transported back to a facility that lawyers have said have, quote, inhumane conditions. CBS News confirmed the Clint, Texas center housed roughly 350 children. More than 200 were transferred to Health and Human Services custody. The rest were transferred to other Border Patrol facilities. Today, 100 returned back to Clint. It remains unclear why. The facility has come under scrutiny in recent weeks. Attorneys who visited it claimed it was overcrowded and unsanitary. Despite gridlock over how to handle immigration, one senator says Congress has a real solution to address the border crisis. And that lawmaker, Republican Senator Braun of Indiana, joins me now from Capitol Hill. Senator, good to see you. Thanks so much for being with us.
Good to be on, Elaine.
So the Department of Health and Human Services has warned that it is severely underfunded to care for the influx of people being detained at the border. And in an op-ed for the Washington Times before the Clint facility reports, you said there is, quote, no better solution than funding the Office of Refugee Resettlement. Why do you feel this is the right path forward?
Well, because clearly there's a crisis at the border, and when you get the Washington Post and New York Times and almost every Democrat that said the same thing. And if we can't get funding for that, the only issue I have with that in general is that it's like most things we do here, we do not offset it. We're in a situation with our budget in general. So that makes it a tough vote because for those of us that are fiscal conservatives, but if there's one thing that we need to be funding, it would be border security to prevent all these things you are seeing at the border. And when it comes to the humanitarian crisis component, I'm really surprised that Democrats seem to be soft on that, simply because I think it gives Trump something that they still mix with border security, and really that's the humanitarian crisis component of it. It gets so confused and blurry at this point, but clearly we're under-resourced, undermanned, and it's due to the fact that the system, the border's being gamed, and it's just not working in total.
I want to turn to another issue. Senator, you sit on the Agriculture Committee, and the President's Agriculture Secretary, Sonny Perdue, said today that farmers are, quote, one of the casualties of the trade wars. Do you think the U.S. government has done enough to provide relief to American farmers? And also, you just said a moment ago how important this issue of fiscal conservatism is for you. How long can the American taxpayer essentially sustain this policy?
Well, of course, the Chinese did the retaliatory tariffs on farmers because they are probably the most loyal of any of the Trump supporters. Chinese are smart. They knew our farm economy was struggling. And when you look at the spring we've had, with the weather being about as bad as it could be for planting, literally when it rains, it pours. And farmers are at the point, but even when we get through tariffs, I still think the farm economy is going to have challenges that are related to things like, really large corporations that sell farmers most of their inputs that have doubled or tripled. I know I'm still involved in farming, both in growing trees and row crops. And the inputs to put out an acre of soybeans and corn have doubled and in some cases tripled over the last 10 to 12 years. And prices have been basically only up a little. So it seems like farmers feel the brunt of it. You got issues like acreage coming on stream in other countries. So we got to create more markets. We're going to need to stay strong against China because I think they're a rogue nation when it comes to how they behave in the economic marketplace. And I really think the president has been right to take them on now. In 5-10 years, our negotiating position will be a lot weaker because there'll be an even larger economy, and you can see they don't play by the rules. They steal intellectual property, force technology transfers, tariffs, they subsidize industries, dump the glut on the market. They behave unlike anyone else. It's a major player on the world scene, and now's the time to hold firm against them.
So let me turn to another issue. President Trump is going to be actually meeting with his Chinese counterpart Xi Jinping Friday at the G20 summit. What do you think should be prioritized in a trade deal if the two sides are actually able to come back to the negotiating table?
For them to change their behavior and quit doing those things that they've done. They backpedaled here a month or so ago because it was getting too close to inking the deal. And I really think they may be calculating of just playing the delay game until November of 2020. I'm sure the president and his team is on to that, but you got to remember, they've liberalized their economy, they haven't their political system, and the Politburo is still running the economy over there. So I say be careful, and for anybody impacted by tariffs from China, especially folks that have moved their supply chain there and are interested in that big market that comes along with maybe putting resources there, be careful. I think it's a good time to kind of relook how many eggs you're putting in the Chinese basket. I know in my own case, I was wary of it 12 to 15 years ago when it started to be an issue in our own industry.
Well, sticking with foreign policy, Majority Leader Senator Mitch McConnell said today he was open to voting on a controversial amendment to the National Defense Authorization Act. It would block funding for military action against Iran without prior congressional approval. Where do you stand on that amendment?
Well, I think that probably will get a vote, and I think that in the mid and long term, Congress needs to take back a lot of what it's chosen to disengage with. That means to have a more active role in this, and especially on any declaration of war. I think now, in the short run, where sanctions are working, where Iran has proven that it's going to do anything to further its goals, you got to give the president flexibility, because I think what we're doing against Iran is working, and I think he called it right on the last incident when the drone was shot down. I think it would have been disproportionate to maybe do what they were thinking about. I think that showed good measure, but he needs to have the flexibility as president in the short run, in the context of what we've done to force them, I think, back to some real negotiations. I'm going to vote against that.
Let me ask you in our final minutes about health care, because this is an issue that, as you know, Democrats really made a centerpiece back in the midterms and intend to continue to focus on here in 2020. You were at the White House yesterday for the president's signing of an executive order on health care transparency. I want to play some of what you said about health care solutions when you were on Red and Blue in April. Let's listen to that.
We've got to, as Republicans, put the plan together and then peck away at it in the meantime, holding pharmaceutical companies accountable, PBMs, and work at parts of it, arriving at a grand plan that I can guarantee you will be better than Medicare for all.
So, Senator, you mentioned a grand plan. How are those efforts by Republicans going?
Well, I think I was pleased that the president was there with an executive order that's saying, hey, compete and be transparent like all other sectors of our economy do. I took on the health insurance companies 10, 11 years ago, and I've got a plan that works. It's based upon the healthcare patient, employee be engaged in their own well-being. They've got to have some skin in the game, and they have to have the tools of transparency and choice. That's the way it works in all other markets. You look at LASIK surgery, you look at electronics. Markets that have plenty of competitors, full transparency, you get the best value and the best price, and generally prices come down. The insurance companies have orchestrated against that by the way this system has evolved, where there's no transparency. I tell the industry, there aren't many like me that are working so hard to save you from your own bad behavior. Get with it. Be competitive, be transparent, or you'll be dealing with a business partner of Bernie Sanders and Medicare for All.
And just a follow-up, Senator, so I want to read a statement. This is from the CEO of America's Health Insurance Plans, a lobbying group, that said this in reacting to the president's executive order, quote, publicly disclosing competitively negotiated proprietary rates will reduce competition, he said, and push prices higher, not lower, for consumers, patients, and taxpayers. What's your response to that?
That's some of the same nonsense that they've been saying for years that have delivered us the highest cost increases in any other market sector until just recently. Ironically, the cost of post-secondary education has eclipsed it. They've been saying that stuff which hides them from what all other industries have, which is transparency. Insurance companies benefit from this because they've got those secret arrangements with providers. All of that needs to come into the open, and if they don't get away from that kind of thinking, believe me, employers, I'm the exception that is pushing to try to save the best of what's good about this healthcare system. Many employers are getting fed up with it. They don't understand why they're caught in the swirl. Employees mostly like employer-provided insurance because they pay for very little of it. So something's got to change. The industry knows what it is. And from pharma to hospitals to health insurance companies, the only place where you see entrepreneurial activity, ironically, would be among doctors. They're caught like farmers in big ag, where they're increasingly dealing with these large corporations that do their own thing.
Before we let you go, I do want to ask you about your home state of Indiana and specifically the city of South Bend. As you know, tensions there are high after a police-involved shooting there last week. How do you feel the city, and especially Mayor Pete Buttigieg, is handling the situation?
Well, this kind of thing has happened across the country, and I think that whenever it does, there's a problem within that department. And I think you've got to vet the other side as well. It's not like this is the first time this has occurred. It is one of the things that is troubling about, law enforcement, across the country. But on the other hand, their lives are on the line every day. So when those things do occur, you got to be transparent. I like the fact that Pete is doing that. But I think this is also symptomatic as he stuck his neck out into the presidential race. There's going to be more scrutiny of, what's been going on in South Bend. It's one of our larger cities in Indiana. And I think he's now getting the reality check that his record is going to be on full scrutiny when you're trying to go from there to running for the biggest office in the world. So I do like the idea that he's going to fully vet it and be transparent in the process.
All right, Senator Mike Braun of Indiana. Senator, thank you so much for your time.
You're welcome.